The sound of the church bells echoed through the small coastal town, rolling over the misty hills like an omen. Nora stood before the mirror in the bridal suite, her reflection pale under the morning light. Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the veil, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Behind her, the bridesmaids whispered in hushed tones, their glances flicking between her and the door, as if weighing invisible doubts. Richard Hale was 30 years her senior, a man of means, mystery, and a reputation that preceded him. He was the kind of man whose presence could silence a room, not because of his charm, but because of the quiet authority he carried. To Nora, that power had once felt intoxicating. Now, on the morning of her wedding, it felt heavier, like a chain disguised as a promise. Narration 60%. The ceremony began under a canopy of white roses. Every detail screamed perfection. The soft music, the scent of lilies, the careful choreography of wealth and elegance. Yet beneath it all, there was tension. Nora's mother dabbed her eyes, but not from joy. Her father stood stiff, his jaw locked, his eyes avoiding Richard's. Among the crowd, a few whispered. Some pitied her, others envied her, but none understood what drew a young woman to a man old enough to be her father. When Richard took Nora's hand, his grip was firm, too firm. She flinched, but the smile on his face never wavered. "You're mine now," he whispered just loud enough for her to hear. The words weren't sweet, they were a claim. The priest continued unaware, as the couple exchanged vows that felt more like terms of surrender than declarations of love. Description, 20%. The sky dimmed as clouds gathered, muting the sunlight over the stained glass windows. The wind carried a chill that made Nora's gown ripple like a ghost's veil. When the couple kissed, applause filled the church, but it sounded hollow, a rehearsed celebration that didn't match the unease in the air. Nora's bouquet slipped slightly in her hand. A single rose petal fell, landing crimson against the marble floor. Dialogue, 20%. At the reception, laughter and music tried to fill the growing silence between them. "You're quiet," Richard said, brushing a stray hair from her face. "Nerves?" She forced a small laugh. "Maybe everything feels surreal." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a murmur. "You'll get used to it. You'll get used to me." Her heart thudded. "I already am," she lied. Throughout the evening, Nora caught glimpses of his other side. The way he corrected the servers with a cold tone, how his eyes lingered too long when she spoke with younger guests. When she mentioned wanting to visit her parents the next morning, his hand tightened around her waist. "No need," he said softly. "They'll see us soon enough." The words were gentle, but his expression was not. As the night drew to a close, fireworks illuminated the lake behind the estate, where they would spend their first night as husband and wife. Nora stood at the balcony, watching the reflections shimmer across the water. From behind, Richard's arms wrapped around her shoulders. Protective, possessive, final. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he murmured. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely audible. "Almost too beautiful." The fireworks ended. The darkness returned, thicker than before. Nora's reflection in the window merged with Richard's behind her. Two silhouettes bound together, one casting a shadow longer than the other. Far below, the lake rippled from an unseen wind, carrying the faint echo of. The drive to Hollow Lake took hours through winding forest roads, each turn drawing Nora deeper into a silence that felt ancient. The world outside the car blurred into shades of green and gray, and with every passing mile her unease grew. Richard drove without speaking, his eyes fixed ahead, the rhythmic tapping of his fingers on the steering wheel the only sound. When the trees finally parted, the mansion emerged, vast, old, and eerily still, its reflection rippling across the lake like a ghost of itself. Narration, 60%. The mansion was older than she imagined, its stone walls covered in ivy, its windows tall and dark like watchful eyes. Inside, the air was cool and heavy with the scent of polished wood, and something else, a faint trace of perfume, aged but lingering. The staff greeted them quietly, their smiles polite but distant. Nora felt as though she were entering not a home, but a preserved memory she didn't belong to. Richard led her through long hallways adorned with portraits. "Family," he said curtly, though the painted faces seemed to stare at her, judging, disapproving. One portrait in particular caught her attention. A woman with auburn hair standing by the same lake outside. Her expression was hauntingly calm. When Nora glanced at the brass plaque, it read, Evelyn Hale, 1968-2016. Richard's first wife. He noticed her pause. She loved this house, he said evenly. I never had the heart to change much after she passed. Nora nodded, pretending not to feel the sudden chill in her chest. Description, 20%. That night, as rain pattered softly against the tall windows, Nora wandered the mansion's halls in her nightgown. The lights were dim, their golden glow flickering against the old wallpaper. Every floorboard creaked as though the house itself sighed with memories. She stopped at a closed door at the end of the west corridor, a part Richard had told her was off-limits. The doorknob was cold beneath her fingertips. For a moment she thought she heard breathing on the other side. Dialogue, 20%. Nora. Richard's voice echoed down the hall. She jumped back as he appeared from the shadows, his face stern but calm. I was just exploring, she said quickly. It's such a big house. That wing is sealed, he replied. There's nothing there for you. Why? His eyes softened, but his tone did not. Because some doors are better left closed. He took her hand, leading her back toward their room. The gesture should have felt tender, but his grip was unyielding. As they walked, Nora noticed how the portraits seemed to follow them, their painted eyes glinting in the faint light. She wondered if Evelyn's spirit still lingered, trapped in the silence of these endless halls. Later, lying beside Richard in the vast bed, she stared at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of rain and the faint ticking of the grandfather clock downstairs. Richard's breathing was steady, already asleep. The house, however, was not. Somewhere in the distance, floorboards' morning light filtered weakly through the long curtains, painting pale streaks across the bedroom. The fog from Hollow Lake hadn't lifted. It clung to the windows like breath on glass. Nora woke alone. The other side of the bed was cold. Richard was already gone. From the adjoining door drifted the faint murmur of his voice. Calm, commanding, speaking to someone on the phone. When he emerged, his expression was composed. But something about his gaze told her the day already had rules she didn't know yet. Narration, 60%. Over breakfast. Richard unfolded a list. Literal, written in his sharp handwriting. Just to make your stay here easier, he said. The list detailed which rooms were private, who she should contact for errands, and even what time dinner must be served. The staff needs structure, he added, but Nora noticed how each rule applied only to her. She wasn't to leave the property without his permission. The West Wing remained off limits, and she was expected to maintain the decorum of a Hale wife, which, as she soon learned, meant dressing modestly, speaking softly, and smiling even when she didn't feel like it. The first week passed in polite captivity. The mansion felt alive in its silence, its walls holding whispers she couldn't name. At night, she heard doors close where no one walked. Sometimes she swore she smelled Evelyn's perfume near the staircase, a faint lilac that vanished as quickly as it came. Dialogue, 20%. One evening, Nora tried to test her boundaries. Richard, she began cautiously, I'd like to go into town tomorrow. There's an art store. He didn't look up from his glass of wine. We have everything you need here. It's just, darling, he interrupted, finally meeting her eyes. This house is your world now. You'll be safest if you remember that. His tone was velvet over steel. Nora forced a nod, though her chest felt tight. Later that night, as he read in the library, she slipped quietly down the corridor toward the locked study, the one room he hadn't mentioned on the list, but always kept bolted. Her bare feet made no sound on the carpet. The doorknob resisted, but she found a small brass key still lodged in the lock, as if someone had forgotten to hide it. Description, 20%. The air inside was stale and cold. Moonlight from the tall window stretched across shelves of old ledgers, dust-covered photographs, and an antique desk. The faint smell of smoke lingered, mixed with something metallic. On the desk lay a small stack of black and white photos. Most showed Evelyn smiling beside Richard, her beauty soft and effortless. But one photo, half torn, half hidden under papers, made Nora's stomach twist. Evelyn's face was bruised, her expression hollow, fear burning in her eyes. A hand gripped her arm tightly. Richard's. Nora's breath hitched. The room suddenly felt smaller, as if the walls were leaning in. She turned to leave, but the door creaked behind her. Nora. His voice was calm, but it froze her where she stood. She spun around, the photo clutched to her chest. I was just curious. He stepped closer, the faintest smile pull. The morning sun spilled weakly through the fog outside, casting pale ribbons of light over the breakfast table. Nora sat in silence, stirring her tea long after it had gone cold. Richard had already left for a meeting in town, leaving behind an emptiness that felt both liberating and suffocating. The photo she had seen in his study still haunted her. Evelyn's bruised face flashed behind her eyelids whenever she blinked. But when she tried to convince herself it was a misunderstanding, the tremor in her hands betrayed her doubt. Narration 60%. That afternoon, she called Lila, her oldest friend, the only person she could still trust. Nora hadn't spoken to her in weeks, afraid Richard might overhear. Her voice shook when Lila finally answered. Nora, where have you been? You sound strange, Nora hesitated. He's different, Lila. Richard isn't cruel, not exactly. But everything I do feels like a test. The house is so quiet it listens. He decides what I wear, who I talk to, when I sleep. Lila's voice hardened. That's not love. That's control. I know how it sounds, Nora whispered, glancing at the door. But he can be so gentle. When he smiles, I believe him again. Maybe I'm overreacting. Nora, Lila said slowly. You're describing gaslighting. That's what abusers do. They make you question your own mind. Her friend's words echoed long after the call ended. Gaslighting. The term felt clinical, detached, too cold for what she felt. Yet deep down, she knew Lila was right. Still, she couldn't stop defending him, even in her thoughts. Richard had saved her from the chaos of her past, or at least that's what she had told herself. Description, 20%. That night, the lake outside reflected the pale moonlight like a blade. The wind carried whispers through the cracked windows. Nora sat by the vanity, brushing her hair. The photo of Evelyn hidden in the drawer beneath her jewelry box. Every sound in the mansion seemed amplified. A door clicking shut, footsteps echoing faintly, the ticking of the clock stretching the silence thin. When she heard Richard's car pull into the gravel drive, her pulse quickened. She slipped her phone under a book, her fingers trembling. Dialogue, 20%. Richard entered quietly, his expression unreadable. Long day? She asked, forcing a smile. Productive, he replied. Then casually he held up her phone. You forgot to lock it. Her stomach dropped. You went through my phone? I just wanted to know who you still talk to. Imagine my surprise seeing Lila's name. He set the phone on the dresser with deliberate care. You told her things about me. I just needed someone to talk to. Someone to poison your mind, he interrupted, his voice calm but razor sharp. You think I don't protect you? That I don't give you everything? Richard, please, she whispered. You're scaring me, he didn't yell. He didn't even raise his voice. Instead, he turned away, walking to the window. The silence that followed was worse than fury. Disappointment, he said softly. Hurts more than anger. He left the room without another word, the door closing gently behind him. The quiet that followed was suffocating. A silence so thick it pressed against her chest. Nora sat frozen, tears streaking her face, realizing his call. The morning after Richard's cold silence, the mansion felt heavier, as though its walls absorbed the tension and exhaled dread. Nora descended the grand staircase to find breakfast already laid out. Toast, marmalade, and black tea cooling beside her plate. Richard was gone again, his absence both a relief and a warning. Only Mrs. Whitmore moved quietly around the kitchen, her frail frame bent but her eyes sharp with worry. Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore, Nora said softly, forcing normalcy. The older woman turned, hesitated, then nodded without meeting her gaze. You didn't sleep well, Mrs. Whitmore murmured. I could hear you pacing. Nora smiled faintly. You must have sharp ears. The maid's hands trembled as she set a cup down. It's not my ears, dear. This house tells on everyone, especially at night. Her words sent a chill crawling up Nora's neck. What do you mean? Mrs. Whitmore looked toward the cellar door across the hall. an old, dark slab of wood with iron hinges that creaked like a groan whenever opened. "Don't go down there," she said in a low voice. "Whatever you hear, whatever you think you see, stay away from that cellar." Nora blinked, half smiling in disbelief. "The cellar? Why?" The maid's gaze lingered on the door. "Some places remember pain, Mrs. Langford. That room remembers too much." Before Nora could ask more, Richard's car pulled into the drive. Mrs. Whitmore straightened abruptly and resumed wiping the counters. "Please pretend I said nothing," she whispered. "He wouldn't like me filling your head with foolish tales." Richard's footsteps echoed through the foyer, measured and deliberate. "Everything all right here?" he asked, his tone light but probing. "Yes," Nora replied quickly. "Just chatting about the weather." His eyes flicked to Mrs. Whitmore. "It's a fine day." No need for chatter. The silence that followed was suffocating. The maid lowered her eyes and nodded, her hands trembling harder. That night Nora lay awake, the words never go down to the cellar whispering through her thoughts. At 2 a.m. she heard faint thuds beneath the floor. Rhythmic, hollow, like footsteps or perhaps dripping water. She pressed her ear to the hardwood, her heart hammering. Nothing. Just the stillness of an old house breathing in the dark. The next morning, she descended to find Mrs. Whitmore's apron folded neatly on the kitchen table. Beside it lay a short note written in looping, delicate handwriting. "Forgive me. I cannot stay. Please heed my warning." Nora's throat tightened. She stepped into the hall calling out, but the only answer was the echo of her own voice. The cellar door seemed to loom larger now, its edges darker than before. Over the following days, the mansion grew quieter. No humming from the kitchen, no gentle footsteps on the stairs, only Richard's slow, deliberate movements and the tick of the grandfather clock in the parlor. Nora tried to focus on her painting, but every creak in the floorboards drew her eyes toward that door. On the third night, she awoke to the scent of earth and decay, faint but distinct. It seemed to drift from beneath the cellar door. Her pulse raced as she crept closer, candlelight flickering across the floor. She pressed her hand to the cold handle, then froze. Behind the door came the faint sound of a woman sobbing. Nora stumbled back. From the days following Mrs. Whitmore's departure blurred into one another, each hour steeped in quiet dread. Nora no longer trusted the stillness of the mansion. It watched her. Every door that creaked, every gust of wind whispering through the corridors felt deliberate, as if the house itself carried secrets she wasn't meant to uncover. One rainy afternoon, while searching for a paintbrush in the attic, she stumbled across a stack of old boxes labeled in Richard's precise handwriting. The air was thick with dust and the scent of mothballs, but one box stood out, its seal newly broken. Inside, wrapped in aging parchment, she found folders marked private, medical records. Her breath caught as she read the name, Evelyn Langford. Richard's first wife, narration 60%. The papers were yellowed, but the ink was sharp enough to sting. Each document detailed visits to a private clinic, bruising, concussions, fractures, all described as accidents. One note in a doctor's scrawl read, "Head trauma, cause unexplained." Nora's fingers trembled as she traced the words. The final file, dated 2 months before Evelyn's death, bore Richard's signature under guardian approval. Her stomach twisted. Suddenly she heard footsteps downstairs, slow, deliberate. Richard was home early. Nora stuffed the papers into the box, her pulse racing, and returned the lid just as the attic door opened. Dialogue, 25%. "There you are," Richard said, his voice too casual. "What are you doing up here?" "Looking for my easel," Nora replied quickly. "I wanted to paint by the window." He smiled, but his eyes flicked toward the stack of boxes. "You always find interesting places to wander." She tried to steady her breath. "It's just an attic, Richard." "Perhaps," he said softly, stepping closer. "But some doors are better left closed." That night during dinner, Nora couldn't hold her silence. "Richard," she began, her fork motionless over her plate, "I found Evelyn's medical records. Why would she have so many injuries?" He didn't flinch. "You've been snooping again." "I needed to understand. What you need," he interrupted, "is rest. You've been anxious, seeing shadows that aren't there. I'm not imagining it." The file said, The files said what I allowed them to say. His tone was gentle, almost tender, which frightened her more than anger. You're not well, Nora. You haven't been for some time. Description, 15%. The dining room lights flickered, their glow casting long shadows across his face. Nora's hands shook as she set her napkin down. His words clung to her like cobwebs, soft, invisible, but suffocating. She tried to recall the details of the files, but already her mind felt clouded, uncertain. Richard reached across the table, his touch feigning comfort. You must trust me, he murmured. Paranoia can destroy even the strongest mind. Later in her room, Nora searched for the box, but when she crept back into the attic, the files were gone. Every trace of what she had seen had vanished, as if the discovery itself had been imagined. Standing in the dim light, her reflection wavered in the attic mirror, pale, trembling, and uncertain. For the first time, she wondered if Richard was right. A week passed since the night the files vanished. Nora's world had grown smaller, confined to the upstairs rooms, the garden path, and the hollow quiet that filled the mansion like fog. Richard had been unusually tender, bringing her tea, reading beside her in the evenings, speaking in soft tones that never quite masked the steel beneath. His kindness felt rehearsed, the gentleness of a predator calming its prey. Then one gray afternoon the doorbell rang. Nora wasn't expecting anyone. Through the window she saw a man standing at the gate, rain dripping from his coat, his posture stiff with purpose. When she opened the door, he removed his hat, revealing sharp blue eyes and a face that looked eerily familiar. Mrs. Langford? He asked quietly. My name is Thomas. I'm Richard's son. Narration 60%. The word stunned her. Richard had never mentioned a son. The man stepped forward, glancing around as if being watched. Please, I just need a moment of your time. Nora hesitated, but something in his expression, urgency mixed with grief, made her open the door wider. She led him into the sitting room where the ticking of the grandfather clock filled the silence. I shouldn't even be here, Thomas said. My father will lose his mind if he finds out. But you need to know who he really is. Nora's pulse quickened. What do you mean? My mother, he said, his voice faltering, didn't fall down the stairs. She didn't slip or faint or whatever story he's telling you. He hurt her. For years. And when she tried to leave, he made sure she couldn't. Dialogue, 25%. Nora shook her head slowly. That's impossible. I've seen the files, yes, but the files. His eyes widened. He kept them? My God, they disappeared, Nora whispered. After I found them, they were gone. Thomas leaned closer, lowering his voice. Then he knows you've seen too much. That's what he does, manipulates, twists, isolates. I tried to go to the police once. He called me a drug addict, told them I was violent. They believed him. He always makes people believe him. Before Nora could respond, the sound of the front door slamming echoed through the house. Richard's voice carried from the foyer, calm, cold, and cutting. Nora, I heard voices. Thomas froze. You have to let me go, he whispered urgently. He can't know I warned you. Nora stood, heart racing. Out the back, she whispered, guiding him through the side corridor. The rain swallowed his figure as he disappeared into the trees. Richard appeared in the doorway, rain still glistening on his coat. Who was that? He asked softly. No one, Nora lied. A delivery man. Wrong address. His eyes lingered on her face, reading every flicker of fear. Strange, he said. Because I thought I heard my son's voice. Description, 15%. He stepped closer, his expression unreadable. You know, Nora, Thomas has always been unstable. He likes to invent stories about me. Drugs, violence, whatever earns him sympathy. It's tragic, really, Nora forced a smile. I'm sorry you have to deal with that. Richard studied her for a long, unbearable moment. Then with a faint smile, he touched her cheek. You're trembling again, he murmured. You really must take better care of yourself. That night, as thunder rolled outside, Nora sat by her window. The storm began just after dusk, a deep, rolling thunder that rattled the glass panes and turned Hollow Lake into a dark, restless mirror. The power flickered twice before settling into a dim, uncertain glow. Nora stood by the window, watching lightning split the sky, each flash illuminating Richard's reflection behind her. Narration, 60%. He'd been silent all evening, sipping whiskey by the fire. Since Thomas's visit, the mansion felt colder, as if some hidden balance had shifted. Nora couldn't tell whether Richard believed her lie, or was simply waiting for the right moment to expose it. "Come sit," he said finally, his tone gentle but unyielding. She obeyed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The firelight painted his face in flickering orange, softening the sharpness of his expression, but not the danger in his eyes. "You've been distant," he said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "You don't trust me anymore." Nora tried to steady her voice. "You've been keeping things from me. About Evelyn. About your son," Richard chuckled, low, humorless. "Thomas came to poison you against me, didn't he? Just like he did with the police, the neighbors. Everyone. Why didn't you tell me you had a son?" "Because he's dead to me," Richard snapped. The sudden volume made her flinch. He sighed, regaining his composure. "He betrayed this family. Like his mother." Dialogue, 25%. "Betrayed?" Nora asked, her voice trembling. "What did they do?" Richard stared into the fire. "Evelyn wanted to leave. She threatened to destroy everything I'd built. I couldn't let that happen." Her breath hitched. "I did what I had to do," he said quietly. "To protect my name. My legacy." The storm roared outside, rain hammering the windows. Nora's heartbeat matched its rhythm. "You killed her," she whispered. His eyes met hers, calm, cold, certain. "I saved her from herself." Lightning flashed, and in that moment Nora saw something metallic glint beneath his jacket. The outline of a gun. She rose slowly from her chair. "You're scaring me, Richard." "You're the one who's changed," he said, standing too. "Sneaking around, lying, talking to strangers. You're becoming just like her, Evelyn." "Yes." His voice cracked, rage spilling through. "Always questioning me. Always ungrateful." Description, 15%. The lights flickered, plunging them into darkness. For a breathless second, the only sound was the storm. Then days and a deafening crack. A gunshot tore through the silence. Nora stumbled backward, the acrid scent of gunpowder filling the air. Her ears rang as she reached for the wall, her fingers slick with something warm. She blinked, not sure if the blood was hers or his. A single candle flickered to life across the room. Richard stood near the fireplace, smoke curling from the barrel of the gun. His face was pale, expression unreadable. "Richard," Nora whispered, "what have you done?" He looked at her, eyes hollow, voice trembling with something like regret. "I told you, my love. Some doors are better left closed." Thunder swallowed his words. The power went out completely, and in that moment and in the pitch-black silence of the storm, someone screamed. When the storm finally broke, it left behind a shroud of silence, heavy, damp, and suffocating. The neighbors had called the police after hearing the gunshot echo across Hollow Lake. By the time the first responders arrived, the mansion's doors hung open, and the faint smell of gunpowder still lingered in the hall. Narration, 60%. Detective Claire Rowe stepped inside, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The grand living room was in chaos, shattered glass, overturned furniture, and a smear of blood leading toward the study. In the center of the floor lay Richard Hale, a single bullet wound staining his white shirt crimson. His eyes were open, glassy, fixed on the chandelier above, and just beyond him, sitting motionless by the fireplace, was Nora. The gun rested beside her on the carpet. Her wedding dress, torn and soaked from the rain, clung to her trembling body. "She's still breathing," an officer said. Claire knelt beside Nora. "Mrs. Hale? Can you hear me?" Nora looked up slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "He was going to kill me. I didn't have a choice." Dialogue, 25%. "Tell me what happened," Claire urged gently. "There was a fight," Nora said, eyes darting toward Richard's body. He told me he did it to his first wife. And then he pulled the gun. I tried to run, but it went off. I don't even remember pulling the trigger." Claire studied her, the shaking hands, the tears that wouldn't fall. "You said he pulled the gun first?" "Yes," Nora whispered. "I swear it, but something didn't fit." The angle of the wound was low and centered, not defensive. The gun was too close to Nora's side, and the trail of blood leading toward the study, faint but clear, didn't belong to Richard alone. "Bag the weapon," Claire ordered quietly, "and check for other prints." As the officers worked, one called out, "Detective, you'll want to see this. Description 15%. He pointed to a second set of muddy footprints leading from the side door, smaller, lighter. They stopped just short of the back gate, where the ground had been disturbed as if someone had been standing there, watching. "Someone else was here," Claire murmured. Nora looked up, dazed. "Thomas, he warned me," she whispered. "He said his father would do this. But what if—" She stopped, trembling. "What if he came back?" The detective frowned. "Thomas Hale? The son?" Nora nodded slowly. "He was here earlier. He said he wanted to protect me." Claire's eyes flicked to the window. Rain streaked slightly ajar. The storm had masked more than thunder that night. Outside, lightning flashed over Hollow Lake once more, reflecting in the still water like a second crime scene waiting to be found. Inside, Nora's sobs filled the silence as officers zipped the body bag closed. But Claire's gaze lingered on the blood trail leading toward the cellar door, half hidden behind a fallen chair. The wood around it was wet, recently disturbed, and in that moment she realized the night's violence might not be over. It had only changed form. The following morning, sunlight cut through the fog that hung over Hollow Lake, revealing the mansion in stark, unforgiving clarity. Yellow tape fluttered against the gate, and news vans lined the gravel road, their cameras waiting like vultures. Inside, Detective Claire Monroe, a woman known for her precision and quiet intuition, reviewed the crime scene photos spread across the mahogany table. Narration, 60%. Something about the story didn't fit. The angles, the evidence, the timing, all too neat, too rehearsed. Nora Hale sat across from her, pale and exhausted, her hands still trembling around a cup of untouched tea. "I told you everything," Nora murmured, voice raw. "He came at me. I defended myself." Claire studied her face. "You said the shot happened while you were backing away." "Yes." "Then why?" Claire asked softly, turning a photograph toward her. "Was the gun fired at an upward angle, from below?" Nora's eyes flicked to the image, then away. "I don't know. I don't remember. You also mentioned calling for help after the shot, but there's no record of an outgoing call. In fact, your entire voicemail history from last night was erased." Nora's shoulders stiffened. I must have dropped my phone." Claire leaned back, folding her arms. "Mrs. Hale, when I entered the house, your phone was on the kitchen counter. Screen cracked. No sign of water damage. The deletion wasn't accidental. Dialogue 25%. Nora's voice quivered. "Are you saying I did it? That I'm lying?" "I'm saying," Claire replied evenly, "that something doesn't add up. You said you were alone, yet 2 sets of muddy footprints were found. One matching a man's shoes, one smaller, like a woman's. And the housemaid, Mrs. Whitmore, she resigned 2 days ago, but no one's been able to contact her since." Nora swallowed hard. "Mrs. Whitmore told me not to go into the cellar. Why?" "She didn't say." Claire's gaze drifted toward the window, where the lake shimmered faintly beneath the morning sun. "You know," she said quietly, "I've seen cases like this before. Victims who fight back, husbands who snap. But what I don't understand," she leaned forward, "is the life insurance policy." Nora blinked. "What?" "Your husband recently increased it to $5 million. Signed just 3 weeks ago. You're the sole beneficiary." For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. Nora's eyes filled with disbelief, or perhaps realization. "He said it was for security," she whispered. "In case something ever happened to him." Claire didn't respond. She watched Nora closely, noting the faint tremor in her voice, the way her hands clenched around the teacup. Description, 15%. Outside, the lake rippled as the wind carried the scent of rain and decay. Reporters shouted questions beyond the gate, their voices muffled through the walls. Claire stood, gathering the files. "I'll need you to stay available for further questioning," she said. "We're still processing evidence." Nora looked up, fear widening her eyes. "Do you think I killed him?" Claire paused at the doorway, her expression unreadable. "I think there's more to this marriage than you've told me. And until I know what happened in that house, no one's innocent." As 3 weeks passed before the truth began to surface, not through confession, but through circuitry. Detective Claire Monroe sat alone in the precinct's dim evidence room, eyes fixed on the flickering footage displayed across the screen. The video had been recovered from a hidden security camera wired into the west wing of the mansion, a camera Richard himself had installed years ago for safety. Narration, 60%. The timestamp read 10:42 p.m., the night of the storm. On the screen, Nora stood near the fireplace, drenched and trembling. Richard's voice thundered over the rain, accusing, venomous. Then Thomas appeared, emerging from the shadows near the cellar door, his face twisted in fear and rage. The argument escalated rapidly. Richard shoved Nora, she stumbled, and Thomas lunged forward, grabbing his father's wrist just as the gun fired. The recoil threw both men backward. When the smoke cleared, Richard fell. The bullet lodged in his chest. Thomas froze, eyes wide with disbelief, the gun slipping from his hands. Nora's scream pierced the static, her hands shaking as she cradled Richard's body. Then, in one frantic motion, she wiped the gun, her fingers pressing against it deliberately. "Go," she whispered to Thomas, her voice breaking. "Run before they find you." Dialogue, 25%. The footage ended there. Claire leaned back in her chair, the hum of the monitor filling the silence. "You didn't kill him, did you, Mrs. Hale?" she murmured under her breath. Later that afternoon, she confronted Nora in the interrogation room, a cold, sterile space lined with mirrored glass. "I've seen the recording," Claire said softly. Nora's face went pale. "Recording?" "The one from the West Wing. Richard's camera." "You weren't alone that night." Tears welled in Nora's eyes. "He came to help me. He didn't mean to." "I know," Claire interrupted gently. "Thomas shot him. You covered it up. You took the blame." Nora's shoulders collapsed under the weight of the truth. "He's just a boy," she whispered. "He's lost everything because of Richard. I couldn't let him lose his life too." Claire nodded slowly. "You were trying to save him. But hiding the truth doesn't erase it. The law still needs a confession. The right one." Description, 15%. Rain began to fall again outside, tapping softly against the interrogation room window. Nora stared through the glass, her reflection fractured by streaks of water. "Where is he now?" Claire asked quietly. Nora shook her head. "I don't know. He said he'd disappear. Somewhere far from here." Claire rose, closing the file. "Then I'll have to find him." As she left the room, Nora's whisper followed her, faint but haunting. "He saved me. But it killed us both." Outside, the storm deepened, washing over the lake with a ghostly sheen. In the reflection of the water, the mansion stood silent and dark once more, its secrets no longer buried, only waiting to be judged. And though justice had found its proof, the line between guilt and love blurred forever on the shores of Hollow Lake. Spring arrived late that year, soft and uncertain, as if even the seasons hesitated to touch Hollow Lake. The mansion was no longer Nora's. It had been sold to an investor who never planned to live there. Its windows were shuttered, its halls stripped bare, and yet, when the wind passed through the trees, it still sounded like whispers of the past echoing through the stone. Narration, 60%. Nora walked the narrow path toward the cemetery, the crunch of gravel steady beneath her boots. The trial had ended months ago. Thomas had never been found, and the footage had cleared her of murder, though not of deceit. The headlines had faded, but the shame lingered like a shadow she could not outrun. She carried no flowers, only silence. Richard Hale's grave rested beneath a weathered oak, the marble headstone gleaming pale against the dark soil. Someone, perhaps one of his former business partners, had left fresh lilies at its base. Nora stared at the inscription. Beloved husband, visionary protector. The word protector twisted inside her chest. "I thought love would save me," she whispered. "But all it did was teach me how easily devotion turns to fear." Dialogue, 25%. A voice startled her. Deep, cautious, familiar. "You shouldn't be here," she turned sharply. Thomas stood several yards away, hands buried in his coat pockets, his expression a blend of guilt and longing. His hair was longer now, his eyes sunken from months in hiding. "You came back," she said, breath-catching. "I had to see for myself," he replied quietly. "That you were still alive." "I told you to run," Nora said. They would have destroyed you. He shook his head. You destroyed yourself instead. Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they couldn't undo. Finally, Thomas looked at the grave. Do you ever think about him? About what he did? Nora's lips trembled. Every day. But not because I miss him, because I still hear his voice in my head. The way he made me believe I was the problem. You're free now, he said softly. She gave a hollow laugh. Freedom doesn't erase the ghosts. Description 15%. The sky darkened as clouds drifted over the sun, casting long shadows across the cemetery. Thomas stepped closer, his hand brushing hers in a touch more like farewell than comfort. I have to go, he said. I know. He turned and walked away, his figure fading into the mist until only the sound of his footsteps remained. Nora lingered by the grave, the wind tugging at her coat. She traced the carved letters one last time, her voice barely audible. Some vows never die, she murmured. They just wait in silence. As she walked back toward the lake, the breeze carried the faintest echo, a whisper that could have been the wind, or a promise from the dead. The camera would have faded out there, on the lonely figure by the water, her reflection rippling beside the ghost of the man she once loved, trapped forever between guilt and freedom. And for those who listened closely, Hollow Lake still spoke, of love turned violent, of devotion turned deadly, and of a marriage that truly ended only when death said it was time.